No sound, Bhante. No sound.
So, but then, that kind of gave me some intellectual understanding of the Dhamma. But at that time, there was no temples around, there was no groups, there was nothing to further my contact with other Buddhists. Maybe in New York or Los Angeles, there might have been some Chinese temples or Japanese temples, or but hardly nothing. Access to Dhamma. So I forgot about it, and I went back to partying and drinking, getting loaded, going to parties, getting in mischief, and so on, and creating bad karma, somewhat, So that intellectual wisdom didn't do me too much good at that time, because I didn't go on thinking about it. So it's just an example of how just the intellectual wisdom by itself is not enough to really get you to start practicing. But then later on, when I got to India and Nepal and took my first meditation course in Nepal, it was a course in Tibetan Buddhism. In that course, they actually had organized that. It was a 1-month course, by the way, a 1-month course. So I'd been trekking up in the Himalayas, and sitting by beautiful Himalayan rivers one day, and all of a sudden some guy came and sat down, by me. It was almost like a deva or something came down and started talking about meditation, and my mind, what meditation? And I kind of remembered about what I read about meditation in the when I did that paper, and also in traveling more than about a year and a half on the hippie trail through Europe, I was getting in a lot of mischief and trouble, and even got put in prison in Afghanistan for trying to smuggle some hashish and all that, and because I was staying too stoned, and it was clouding my mind. I was lucky to get out of jail in Afghanistan with my life. And then I realized I got to do something. I got to change my mind, but I didn't know exactly what. So actually, before I got to Nepal, I stopped at Sarnath, which is one of the 4 Buddhist holy places in India. How many people have heard of Sarnath or have been there? So that was where the Buddha preached his first sermon. So I was sitting there in this little park they had, and I was trying to remember what the Buddha taught, and he said, trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to get tired of just following the hippie trail and things like that. And so then again, as I mentioned, then I was in Nepal and heard about meditation, and something inside said, that's my chance. That's what I got to do. It was really a strong feeling. And so I didn't even finish my trek. I was about halfway through my trek going up to Muktinath in the Himalayas. And I went back down to Kathmandu, afraid that the course was going to fill up because they had a quota of people they could take, and I wouldn't get in. So I was so motivated, almost ran 3 days out of the mountains down to sign up. Anyway, so in this course, they followed these 3 levels of wisdom. Every day we would hear a lecture from the Lama and read a chapter in the book about various things like the, Four Noble Truths and greed, hatred, and delusion, and suffering, of course, and basic Dhamma teachings. And then, following that reading or hearing the lecture, we have to sit and meditate and think about that. it wasn't this kind of meditation we're doing now. It was thinking meditation. We were told to memorize these 10 things, these 5 things, and then actually think about them. Try to remember what we read and what the Lama was telling about it, and thinking about it. Yes, Four Noble Truths, suffering, what kind of suffering? Oh, yes. And I went back in my life and saw how I suffered from telling lies and stealing and other kind of things like that, mental suffering and just thinking about the world, greed, hatred, and delusion. And, when you think about it, it's more powerful than just reading about it. You actually think about it and go back and see the actions that you did, years ago and how they followed you around, like my action of, trying to smuggle hashish in Afghanistan. It followed me around for a few years when I entered another country. The police, I was on the Interpol list for about 10 years for being a drug smuggler. So it was following me around that way. It's not funny, but it is kind of funny. But there's a whole story behind that, but I won't go into that. Anyway, so, and then, so we thought about it. And then in the meditations, following the meditations, and we started to get insights in it too. So anyway, so the thinking about it made a big difference. When you go on thinking about the Dhamma, and especially when you're observing how greed, hatred, and delusion has caused you a lot of suffering in your life, not only you, but of course other people and the whole world basically is in the problem it's in because of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, that kind of contemplation is important to really, get it beyond the brain and get it down, into the heart, so to speak. And then seeing that cultivating your own motivation to want to do something about it. So, so anyway, the right understanding basically is the main part of that is about the karma, about how most of the suffering that we experience is because of the result of our own actions, and not only in this life, but perhaps even coming from previous lives. Now, that was one thing I didn't, know about anything about rebirth before, because it was a foreign concept, for Americans that long ago. And so, thinking about that and realizing that, these habits that people have, it's hard to believe that they would just start in this life itself, the strong habits. And when people are, and how everybody's life takes a different direction in life. Even people from the same family will go completely different ways, and that was hard to accept. Why is that? If they, came from the same mother and father, they should all kind of be the same, right? I mean, that was a typical deluded idea. But anyway, so that right understanding, and then when you start meditating, you start, really understanding the deeper levels. So that the right understanding is like a roadmap. So if you want to go from, let's say, if you want to drive from, Washington, D.C., down to, Florida, for example, you might think, I don't need a map. I'll just get in my car and, just drive. And so you get in your car on a nice Saturday afternoon with a 6-pack of beer and a couple of joints, right? And you're convertible and you start driving down the road, getting high, and you miss the turnoff, and you wind up going toward, Ohio or something, or Texas. And, you get sidetracked, maybe get in an accident. Because you thought you knew the way, but you didn't follow any map. So it's good if you're going to a destination, you should have a map. So the Buddha was a map maker. He was one of the greatest map makers. So if you want to go from a point of suffering to a point of non-suffering, then you need to know the way. By somebody who's been there, done that. So you know, different maps, even road maps, right? Some of them are more detailed than others. You know, they show you the detours and other things, the scenic routes, or rather than just some lines saying here and turn here and there. So the Noble Eightfold Path, the teachings of the Dhamma, the Eightfold Path, is that roadmap of how to, disentangle the tangle. And so the right understanding, comes first. And then followed by right thought. And that means, as I've already been mentioning, thinking about what you've read and heard about. So there's three kinds of right thought, given in the definition of right thought. And that's the thought of renunciation. But basically it means the thought of, I'd rather define it as lightening up, with a thought of, lightening up your life. So it's the antidote of greed. Most people are just accumulating more and more things, and people's houses and garages are full of stuff and junk that they've been accumulating for years and years and years. And so it's also thinking about, the fact of greed, always wanting more and more and more, never being satisfied. And most of the things we want are not really that fulfilling. They just tantalize our senses, and we have some brief experience. You get something, but then you lose interest in those things. And maybe you go shopping, buy things just because you think you need them. And when you get them home, you might use them once or not even at all, and put them in the attic or closet, and it's and people's burden their lives with so much stuff that they have to protect it and then stumble over it and then don't have any time to go on retreats because they have accumulated so many things that they have to protect and so on. Anyway, so the thought of renunciation. So basically that means understanding how greed, is like a never-ending process, because we all know all these millionaires and billionaires I read about, they all want more, don't they? They got more money than they can even fathom, and yet they want more and more and more. So anyway, so the second one is the thought of non-ill will. And so that means like harboring resentments about people or things or groups of people that you don't agree with, or that somehow caused you or somebody problems. And so there's resentment and ill will, which is like a heavy poison in our mind. And so we carry around. And so the antidote to the ill will, of course, is the practice of metta. So the antidote for greed is renunciation. That means letting go of so many unnecessary things that are burdening your life, and letting them go. And so you have more time and space to kind of do what you really want, not just protecting all these heirlooms. People inherit stuff from their grandparents or great-grandparents and grandparents and parents, and all these heirlooms that, full of closets and almirahs in their houses, but what are they, and they have to protect them, and they never really use them, and it's just they get in the way, and they wind up having to have yard sales to get rid of it so they can collect more stuff. So anyway, so the antidote for the thought of non-greed is, practicing generosity, giving, giving things away if you need to, and sharing. So the antidote for ill will is metta. Instead of thinking ill will towards persons, you think, well, the people that do things that bother us, they're also suffering from greed, hatred, and delusion. Just like I myself was suffering from greed, hatred, and delusion. Or anybody. Everyone suffers from greed, hatred, and delusion in one way or another. So you think, yeah, those people that you have ill will toward, they need our, compassion. So anyway, just to let go of that ill will, because it's it's like a poison for the mind. And then the third thought is the thought of non-cruelty. So non-ill will and non-cruelty seem to be fairly similar, and they are. But cruelty is a kind of a more active thing where you're actually creating karma. Ill will is primarily a thought in your mind. You keep on thinking, this dirty so-and-so, I hate them more. But cruelty is when you actually are cruel to people by using bad language to them, or by being cruel in so many other ways, even by your mind or your actions. And so the opposite of cruelty is the practice of compassion. And helping others, to relieve the suffering of others rather than, wanting to cause harm to others. So these three thoughts basically are what are defined as right thought, samma sankappa, in the Eightfold Path. But basically it means thinking about the Dhamma. But all three of those kind of right thoughts are the main aspects of Dhamma. Greed is the cause of suffering, right? And then the ill will and the cruelty is what causes you to break precepts. And then you have to reap the painful result of, breaking precepts. So that it's all very much, tied together in the, in the Dhamma. So now you have right view and you have right thought. Now, right view and right thought forms a larger umbrella group called the wisdom. And the wisdom I already explained was this 3 levels of wisdom, but at least that intellectual wisdom and the wisdom from thinking, they're considered the wisdom group. But right view is important because if your views are wrong, your thoughts will be wrong. And if your thoughts are wrong, your speech will be wrong. If your speech is wrong, your actions will be wrong. If your actions will be wrong, your livelihood will be wrong. And your effort will be wrong. Your mindfulness will be wrong, and your concentration will be wrong. That's why the right understanding is all important. Now, this word, usually the Eightfold Path, is translated in most of the Dhamma books as right view, right thought, right speech, action, livelihood, right effort, mindfulness and concentration. But some people don't like that word right, because people nowadays are all caught up in all this kind of exact hair splitting and all kind of different, wanting to give different meanings to things. So some other translators have translated as harmonious. like a Venerable Punyaji, that some of you might have read some of his books. He was one of my early teachers too, Venerable Punyaji. And he translated as harmonious view and harmonious thought and harmonious speech and actions, because you're doing those things in harmony with the laws of nature, or with the law of karma. So the law of karma says if you act with greed, hatred, and delusion, suffering will follow, like the wheel follows the hoof of the ox. And if you act or speak with without greed, hatred, and delusion, with the opposites of non-greed, non-hate, non-delusion, then more comfort and happiness will follow. So that's being in harmony with the laws of nature. You're living in harmony with the law of karma. And that's why he translated it as harmonious view, because you live harmoniously with others, because you're not breaking the precepts, causing other people's grief, and so on. So you're not creating waves in the world, more in harmony. So that's also a good translation of that. Anyway, so we have the right view and the right thought. Okay, these are mostly mental. Now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You got to clean up your karma, to use that kind of catchphrase, right? So right speech, clean up your speech, clean up your actions, clean up your livelihood. So this is where most of our karma is created, in the way that we language. And 4 of those precepts you recite each night. How many remember those precepts you recite each night? There's 4 connected with the speech. To abstain from false speech, lying. To abstain from malicious speech, which means rumor mongering and telling tales about others behind their backs, even whether it's true or not, in order to ruin people's reputations, or to, especially the slandering and telling tales about others is a way our ego tries to protect itself. So look at all these politicians, right? They all have skeletons in their closet. And so they're busy digging out all these skeletons of the other politicians. So people will look at them and not him, or herself. So they're pointing out, somebody smoked pot 30 years ago. Oh, he's a bad person. When this guy's telling lies every single day, and he's saying, oh, that person did something 30 years ago, right? And so they want people to look at them and not himself or themselves. So it's very interesting that why rumor mongering and telling tales, slandering and gossip. So usually it's gossip about others, and when people get together at the family table, they're talking about other relatives and all telling their faults and or something like that. So my mother and father they didn't want to tell anybody about my escapades, because I did a lot of, I was put in the army prison for going AWOL, I was put in jail in Afghanistan for smuggling hashish. They didn't want the neighbors to know those things. So they kept quiet. But when they said, my son's a monk, they didn't know which one was going to be worse. Anyway, that's another side issue. So the right speech is, observing, refraining from those 4 kinds of negative speech. But there's opposites to that. So it's not like just refraining from telling lies, because people can refrain from telling lies, but they may not tell the truth. So the opposite of refraining from telling lies, the positive aspect, because all the precepts have like a positive aspect and a negative aspect. The negative aspect is don't do that. The positive aspect is do the opposite. So instead of telling lies, promote the truth. Tell the truth. But sometimes that may be a little bit difficult in this world, and there's a lot of gray areas, but anyway, and then instead of slandering people, only talk about their good qualities, not their bad qualities. Because everybody has good qualities and bad qualities, but normally we like to talk about people's bad qualities because it makes us look better. As I already mentioned. And then there's the harsh speech, using four-letter words, but especially with anger behind it. Now, for those of us who are born up in this country, back in the day before all this woke stuff and before all this Aquarian consciousness and everything, we grew up learning curse words, a lot of things like that, and strong habits, especially for like four-letter words and things like that. But nowadays they're so commonplace that it's just common language to use those, and there may not be hatred behind it. But the harsh speech is basically, speech that has, anger and hatred behind it. So, people usually use those words with that, but anyway, it's so to refrain from using those words, using more kind and gentle speech and, socially acceptable type of speech and so on. And nowadays, in this modern era where you with all these other things, I don't want to mention them because I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but we have to watch our speech more and more these days not to offend certain types of people, so it can be difficult to sort it all out. But anyway, so and then the last one is useless speech, and that means just when people get together and just talk a bunch of foolish things, and anyway, speech that just increases one's greed, hatred, and delusion. The Buddha had a very strict interpretation of right speech. He said, whenever two people get together, especially he was talking to his monks, whenever two or more of you get together, either speak the Dhamma or keep quiet. So anyway, so the right speech, we create a lot of karma through our bad speech. How many of you in your own experience have created some difficult situations or karma by your own speech in the past? People resented what you said to them, or they're telling other people, you know what they said, or just they get offended by something you said. And that can follow you around for a long time, especially like telling lies. People will know you as a liar. And your reputation will get like that. So, and sometimes the wrongly aimed words can do more harm than a knife wound or a bullet. Because you can heal from a bullet wound, it's not too serious. You heal, or a stab wound in a month or two, but some wrongly timed words had divided families for, many, many years until their deathbeds, over just a few wrongly timed words. And again, once you let the word out of the mouth, you can't take it back, even if you say, oh, I'm so sorry. No, it's never going to work. Those people are still going to hold that resentment in their mind, or at least a lot of them would. So anyway, that's why the right speech is a very important part of the disentangling the tangle of our mind. And then there's the right action. The right action is of three types of right action. That means what you do with the body. So stealing is one of them, taking what is not given. And then sexual misconduct, using the body to take advantage of people by, addictive, those kind of, energies. Harming and abusing other people, using that. We see it's very rampant in the world. Even cost some people the presidency, for not controlling themselves. And then so the stealing, killing, and killing, of course. Killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are the three things by the body. So to avoid those things, and so the opposite of those things would be to, instead of killing, to, try to protect life or not to harm life. Now, killing is the actual precept, but if you want to take it a little bit further, then not even to want to harm or, harm other people, like getting into fights with them or kicking the dog or something, or, even like to animals and so on. To be more gentle, to cultivate a more gentle, mind and action, where people don't have fear around you. Because, people that steal and lie and abuse and fight people, you don't like to be around this kind of people because they're like a time bomb waiting to go off. So, we create so much karma that, again, will last a lifetime. So those, the right speech, right action, and then right livelihood. And this means having a job in the world, because you all have to earn a living of some sort, right? You have to be kind of at least useful, doing something in the world. Now, even monks living in Sri Lanka and Thailand, the forest, and monks who are living in, practicing meditation and so on. A lot of people think, they don't do anything for society, but actually in those societies, they do a lot for the society. In fact, in Sri Lanka, I lived in this place called Unawatuna for 5 years. It was on a hilltop on the south coast of Sri Lanka, on top of a hill, and right there at my doorstep was the Indian Ocean. You could see all the way to the South Pole. I mean, it was just, and I was on this hill and I had it all to myself pretty much. And I had built a little kuti that I mentioned. I think the picture of it is on one of the books over there. And, but the people in the village, they were so happy I was going to live there. And I went on my alms round because a lot of these people were poor people living in the village, and they couldn't afford to go to the temples and have to bring all this food, and it costs a lot of money to go to a temple and give a dana where there's 5 or 10 monks and this and that, and a lot of the poor people can't afford to do that. But one lone monk going around with his little begging bowl, and then the average person could get a banana and put it in there, or put a spoonful of rice in there, and that would make their day. You can ask some of these Sri Lankan people, makes your day, right? Act as an inspiration, for the people that are not in a position to spend a lot of time practicing the Dhamma, and especially like us Westerners, because the Western people that have come to Sri Lanka and become monks, there's quite a number of them, they think that in those days, not maybe now, but back in the 70s, anybody from Europe or America was a millionaire in their eyes. And so they would see us Westerners, living in some little mud hut, or living in this climate with its mosquitoes and very humid, and having to eat the spicy food, and not used to that, being subjected to diseases, and having poisonous snakes and scorpions, crawling in your kuti. They thought, wow, these Westerners have given up all that and to come here and live like that. Not all of them live like that. I did for a while, not all the time, but I did for periods of time. And it's very challenging for the practice. But the ordinary person, they really respected that. And so they bent over backwards to, give you food and make sure you, help you build a kuti if you need to, and things like that. So I'm just saying that to show that the even monks practicing the Dhamma like that, and in those countries, they're doing a lot for the population. Now here in the West, it may not be considered so much because the whole world viewpoints are totally different, and so on. So anyway, so that that right livelihood, to have a job, that right livelihood means basically having a livelihood that wouldn't cause you to directly or even indirectly break any of those precepts. And so we know nowadays that it's sometimes difficult to find a job that doesn't then somehow kind of cross the line in terms of telling the truth or cheating, because so much jobs and competition, people fudge the truth on their products and saying, oh, tobacco doesn't hurt anybody, this doesn't hurt, all this junk food doesn't hurt anybody. And they're promoting all these, kind of white lies about things, which is basically a kind of lies, and so, or cheating on like tax records, and like the poor secretary, right? So these secretaries working for big corporations, and they're tallying up their taxes at the end of the year, and maybe their corporation earned many millions of dollars, and and then the boss comes over and looks over the secretary's shoulder and says, oh, change that 50 million to just 5 million. And the secretary said, what? That wouldn't be very truthful. He said, well, there are 10 people waiting for your job. So the person feels pressured, right, to do something that they might not want to do, or to produce things that they know are harmful for people. So there's some traditional jobs that somebody who's practicing the Dhamma or considered themselves to be a Buddhist would try not to have certain types of jobs. And one would be raising animals to get slaughtered. So like farming in that way, especially if you're raising animals, and specifically to sell them to the slaughterhouses and so on. Or using, selling poisons and weapons, of course. It's a no-brainer. Being in the military, there was a question about that too. But so many other professions, even medical professions, are lying about some medicines too, right? And so many things. So it's important, especially for young people, they have their life ahead of them, to carefully consider what you want to do with your life and to earn your living, because you're the one that has to go home and sleep at night. And if you've done something you shouldn't have done, or in some of these things, you might feel guilty or not so good about it, or lose your sleep worrying about it, you're going to get caught. Now we see all these big companies, they're all being investigated, right? And people, these people are getting caught for fraud and cheats. It's rampant. So people think it's just naturally now in business. People go into business for that reason, some of them, just to cheat and deceive. So these kind of things would be considered wrong livelihood because it's going to affect your mind in one way or another. So to be able to go home at night and say, I didn't hurt the flea, then your conscience would be free. You haven't broken any precept, you haven't done anything to hurt anybody. So the mind will naturally have a more buoyant, happy state. So that's the. So those three steps of the Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, form the umbrella group of the sila. So sila is a word that we normally give for like the precepts. But this is more than just that. The word sila comes from a root in Sri Lankan language, the word sitala. Right? What does sitala mean in Sinhalese? To cool, yeah. So sila means to cool down your mind. Because most people's minds are on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. That's why we break the precepts of killing, lying, cheating, raping, pillaging, and plundering, and intoxicating our mind, and all those kind of things. Because our mind is on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. So to cool down, practice sila means cool down. And cool down the fevers of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. And that people who break the precepts are always looking around on their shoulder. They're going to find out, and lose sleep and sweat about, people are going to find out what you did. And so to cool the mind, the practice is sila. So it's a very nice word. It has a really precise meaning. So sila comprises right speech, right action, right livelihood. And so it forms that one of those three main categories of, sila, samadhi, and panya. The Noble Eightfold Path, all those 8 steps are broken into these 3 groups of sila, samadhi, and panya. Panya are the first 2 I mentioned, right understanding and right speech belong to the panya. And then the right action, right speech, right livelihood belong to the sila. And then the samadhi is the last category of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And people say, right effort, right effort is listed under the meditation group. We'll kind of get to that. But basically, right effort means the effort to do all the above, the effort to acquire right view, the effort to practice right speech, right intention. So the right thought and right intention, because this word intention was brought up the other day in a question, right? So the intention, actually samma sankappa, that second step of the Eightfold Path, which is often translated as right thought, but it's also translated as right intent. So the intention to, practice non-greed, and the intention to cultivate metta and compassion. So anyway, the right effort also has 4 parts. So the effort to abandon negative states of mind that come into your mind. So you're sitting there meditating, and all of a sudden this memory of somebody who cheated you or did something to you, and you start developing these negative thought toward them, ill will or something. So when I said it, a lot of people like to, they get cheap thrills out of, thinking hatred about others, you get some kind of kick out of it, belittling others and tearing people down. They get off somehow on that. But that causes its own problems later. So the effort to abandon those thoughts and then the effort to prevent them from coming again. Or sometimes it's listed in the opposite order. The first step was to prevent negative states from coming into your mind, but if they do, to abandon them. And then the effort to cultivate wholesome states that you don't yet have yet. That means if you're lazy and you don't like to get up early in the morning to meditate, right effort would say, get up early and do morning meditation if you know it's good for you, or do yoga or anything else. So the effort to overcome lazy habits, the effort to do what is right, which means basically practicing the other steps. And then the effort to perfect them. So you can start the practice, but it's easy to give them up later on, or you might just do it a little bit and think, oh, that's enough for me, and But the effort to even perfect them and make them automatic, so that you just do them automatically and don't even have to think about it. You don't have to think about getting up earlier in the morning to meditate. You just do. There's habits that you create, or so many other positive habits. But in meditation, it means driving those thoughts out of your mind, because most of them will be the hindrances. So the 5 hindrances, the things that block your meditation progress, are thinking about sensual desire, thinking about ill will, and then sloth and torpor, just mental and physical lethargy. And then restlessness and worry. It basically comes from worrying and being restless for, because of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, or just antsy, just not being able to calm down, always, scratching this and scratching that, and moving around. What time is it? When's this going to be over? You just can't kind of settle down. So it's called a restlessness. Usually comes from worrying about things, but could be other influences too. And then doubts. Maybe you're meditating, or maybe you read some other books. Maybe some books by Jehovah's Witness or some other Muslims. I'm not talking down to anything. I'm just giving some examples. You might think, oh, maybe that other one. Maybe you're not making enough progress in meditation, and you start to doubt. I've been meditating for 3 days and I haven't attained Nibbana yet. I mean, what is this? Was the Buddha really enlightened, or what is this? So these doubts might come into a person's mind. Okay, I'm being a little bit, facetious about it, but still, the idea is that these doubts do creep into people's minds, because as Westerners, especially people born after 1990, this is a push-button world. Now everybody wants instant this and instant that, right? You just push a button and anything can happen. And so they think the same should be true with changing their mind, changing the way they think, or practicing Dhamma, that they should be able to gain instant concentration by just in a weekend retreat. They should attain the first stage of enlightenment. And then they don't. And and they start doubting, and maybe I ought to change, maybe I should be a Hindu or a yogi, or whatever. There's so many nowadays. There's so many choices out there. People go shopping around, and so that's a hindrance, because it doesn't allow you to really fully focus on the practice at hand. So those 5 hindrances. And those hindrances arise because of the way you lead your life, and just not being disciplined in your life leads to indiscipline of your mind when you try to meditate. You can't just turn it off. And that's why the whole life has to be, all the steps of the Eightfold Path are there to create the right conditions in the daily life, so when you sit down, you'd be able to much more easily, without much trouble, entering into deeper states of concentration. And so, and then the last two, we've already been talking about them quite a lot: right mindfulness and right concentration. I might talk more about that in the next couple of days too. But I just wanted to go over these, this Noble Eightfold Path. And why is it called a Noble Eightfold Path instead of just the Eightfold Path? Because if you follow the Eightfold Path, it leads to the noble liberation of the mind, rather than just following any old path that just kind of leads to dead ends or leads to a very kind of mediocre results and things like this. But following, called an Arya Astangika Marga, the Eightfold Path. Anyway, it's broken down into three subgroups, as I've already mentioned. The Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Normally it's mentioned in that way, Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, but actually when it's listed in the Eightfold Path, it comes Panya, Sila, and Samadhi. So actually, the Panya comes first in terms of the intellectual understanding, because that's what gets everybody started. Without having to come across a course in rural religions, who knows what my life would have taken. I don't know. And so that's why that first level of Panya is actually very important. Everybody thinks, oh, just meditate. Just sit down, meditate, and try to blank out your mind and somehow enter some samadhi, and they think that is going to be wisdom and all that. It's probably not going to work. But the actual development of wisdom, when you read the sutras, one of the people was reading the sutras, and it bring them great joy in reading sutras. So even gaining an intellectual understanding, especially if you read sutras, there's so much in there that brings a lot of joy and insights in your mind just from reading, the hundreds and thousands of suttas. That means the discourses of the Buddha. And doing that can motivate you then to, want to practice. So anyway, we'll probably talk more about these, but I don't want to go on too long because we're already kind of coming over our time. So I'm going to finish up this talk. And if any of you have any questions for tonight, write them down for the Q&A session tonight. Okay? Okay, for those who are out there in Zoom land, my tech assistant, Prashant, has agreed to broadcast the Q&A sessions, which will be starting just after 7 o'clock. We have a short puja at 7, it only takes 5 minutes. And then the Q&A session, which they're usually about what we discussed in these. So feel free to join in this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, if you like. Okay? So go ahead and okay, so slowly transition from the sitting up to the standing for short standing, maybe short walk around and a few stretches before sitting again.